everyone, it's Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and today I'm sharing with you prompts 10, 11, and 12 from the Gel Printing Everyday Instagram challenge from Birgit Koopsen as well as Gelli Arts. So prompt 10 was printing with pigment inks. Pigment inks are a sticky, kind of oily ink that was in the past predominantly used for a couple different things. One of them is embossing because it's sticky ink. You can put powder on it and then emboss and do heat embossing with it, whether it's with a clear or a metallic or a color, whatever. That's the kind of ink that you would use to do heat embossing. Another thing that it was used for pretty predominantly for a while was scrapbooking, because if you wanted to stamp in your scrapbooks and you wanted it to be archival and acid-free and long-lasting, non-fading, then you would use the pigment ink because it was a lot more archival and doesn't fade as fast. So I have this box of small ink pads. I also have the large ink pads, but I hardly ever use these things. I was never particularly fond of pigment ink when I was a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. It takes too long to dry. That was the thing that bothered me about it. You just kind of have to set it aside to dry. But with the gel plate, it's still sticky. You could still emboss with it, but it does make kind of interesting, sort of soft focus prints. Like, they're not as intense as the acrylic paint. You can use it with stencils like you can see me doing here. You can use it direct to the plate from the ink pad. You could brayer it. One thing that does not work, however, a common way that I print, that you see me print, is to put a bunch of stuff on the plate and then pick it up with a very thin layer of acrylic paint. Well, pigment ink resists acrylic paint because it's oily, it's sticky, I don't know exactly what's in it, but somehow it's got a resist property to it. So that being said, you can't pick it up with paint. You just need to wipe it off once you're done using it and, pick it up with paper. Picking up the entire layer with a thin layer of paint like I like to do doesn't work with pigment ink. That's not what it's for. In fact, I could probably develop some sort of resist technique using the pigment ink to resist maybe on the plate. But the thing is, it will never dry. It will, maybe in 5 years it might dry on the plate. I don't know, but it's not going to dry on the plate. What I did want to try out, which I didn't have time for, I'm so busy this month. It's so crazy this month. I have so many things I have to do on top of, life things with infusion centers and all that type of stuff too, and then trying to get all these hops done and all these different things. So I didn't get a chance to just sit there and emboss with it. I think it would be fun to use some of the cool new embossing powders that are out these days to make all kinds of textures and interesting things. A lot of them, designed by Seth Apter or some of those type of people with Emerald Creek. It would be fun to just sit there and print and emboss, print and emboss, print and emboss. And you could definitely, absolutely do that with this pigment ink printing. It would be fun. You could make a whole really cool kind of grungy textured background with it. Be messy as heck. You'd have embossing powder all over the place, but it would be fun. But I didn't have time to demonstrate that to you. If you do it, then maybe post over in Art Joy of Sharing so that we can see what you did with embossing powder combined with the pigment inks. But it won't be me doing it unless it's some other month. Maybe I'll try it. So the little teeny tiny pigment ink pads I have from Stampin' Up! Are old. And I do have a few re-inkers, and I did re-ink that brown one. You can see how much brighter it is. But they still work, but they're a lot lighter. And I'm trying different types of papers as I'm going through here. I've got some smooth cardstock. I've got regular paper from the printer, just cheap text weight paper. And I have even a piece of watercolor paper that was cut down to size. I'm just using my 6x6 and my 3 by 5 or whatever that one is. I still haven't figured out what size that one is. Anyway, the smaller pads to do this, I don't need a whole bunch of big giant sheets of this paper to use, so it's not a problem. I did make some impressions with different things like the textured wallpaper turned out pretty cool. That last one I just showed you with the kind of plant looking things, that's textured wallpaper. Using that to make an impression. I used a stencil a couple times. This time I just used the ink pad, the little tiny square ink pads to make a pattern, a repeat pattern. And I'm just messing around. Uh, the other pads that I have, the yellow and blue and orange ones that I have that are super juicy that you'll see me using in a bit, I just got those as a gift from Stencil Girl Products. They were sent to us. Colorbox, the company that makes them, I guess, is going out of business, which is kind of sad. They're a craft standard. They've been around forever. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure these pads are still available somewhere, but I know they're not going to be manufactured anymore. But these are super juicy, and see how they make such a nice kind of spongy looking impression. And I think that's because the pad itself is really kind of a sponge. If you you know touch it, it's like a foam sponge, like a dense foam sponge is what this ink is delivered in the pad. So when, of course, you put that type of texture onto the plate, it makes the texture. So they kind of look soft focus is the way I think they look. But doing them direct to the plate like that was pretty fun. Also, I used a piece of watercolor paper to pick it up on these more juicy ones because I thought it would dry faster. The watercolor paper is more absorbent, but the one on the left here is different than the one on the right. And the reason is that the one on the right is the watercolor paper and the one on the left is regular cardstock, a smooth cardstock. So it does change the effect that it has dependent upon the paper because the watercolor paper is more porous. It's also more absorbent, but it is, it's got a texture to it. So you're getting the texture of the foam pad on the plate plus the texture of the paper in addition. So then I got out some of those little carved fun foam stamps that I made the other day because they were just right there under the desk in a plastic box. And I decided to play with those with the pigment inks, stamping them onto the plates to make texture, and that was pretty fun. They worked good with the pigment inks. So I think my favorite prints are the ones that I did here at the end with the little stamps. That's on the watercolor paper, and then this one is the smooth cardstock. You will get this ink all over yourself. It's sticky and wet and juicy. It gets on your hands, it gets everywhere, but of course paint does too, so what's the difference? Not much. So here's the very last one is the one that I did where I put a little of embossing powder on. I should have put a detail or just a regular embossing powder. What I had next to me on the table is that big giant container of the thick, ultra thick embossing powder. And so, wow, what a mess. I thought, oh, I'm going to do some embossing, and I dumped that stuff on there. And then when I went to use the heat tool, it blew all over my desk. It got all over the plates. It got all over everything on my desk. It was a huge mess. So then after that, I gave up. But this does give you that idea that you could do it. It does stick to the printed piece. Maybe if I'd used the lower pressure, the heat it tool. But man, I got that stuff all over the place. That's the thing I always hated about embossing powder. But it does make a cool effect, and it could be really fun. I should do it sometime in the future. Maybe I'll make myself a note. Yep, I'll make myself a note. So there's a close-up of some of the prints. The next prompt was multiple layers. Now there's a couple different ways you could do multiple layers. You could do a print and then set it aside, put some more paint on and do another print, set it aside and build up your layers that way. But what I prefer is to just build up the layers on the plate. I enjoy that. That's how I print anyway. So I'm using, to start out with, a little foam brayer. It's something you can buy I got them on Amazon, but they're, I'm sure, available in the Home Depot or the, the store where you would buy paints and things. I think that they're probably designed for that, but easy to use, puts a little bit of a layer on the plate in a different way than a regular soft rubber brayer does. So all I'm doing is I'm building up colors, starting with my light colors, moving to a little bit of darker colors, putting on some texture using rubber stamps, and I think in this one I used the sequin waste, and just building and building and building. The thing that you need to remember when you're doing this is that whatever is on the bottom, whatever is the first thing you put on there before you put other layers on is going to show on the top. So you're making a reverse image. So that's why I start with lighter colors and work to darker colors, because I want the lighter colors to be on the top layers, or else they're not going to show. The darker things are just going to cover them up. Of course, there are situations where you would want to do that. So, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's just something you need to think about as you're building the layers onto the plate. That one already had a bunch of old paint on it, which was dark, and so it looks different than the other one. But I didn't put as much different layers on the small plate as I did on the large plate. I'm messing around with multiple plates, which I often do, because I'm letting the layers get good and dry in between. So I can play with the 6x6 while I'm waiting for that top layer of the 12x12 to dry. So that's the reason that I have. See, that's all that paint I picked up, all that dirty leftover paint. Makes an interesting print. So here's a multi-layer print with lots of different layers of paints and colors and textures on the plate. So I decided to start another one. It was pretty fun. I liked it. This time I brought in some alcohol inks, and I started out with some titanium white paint, and then I put on some alcohol ink. People always fuss, oh, is that alcohol ink going to stain your plate? Oh, is that whatever going to stain your plate? Look at the one on the right here. This 6x6. It looks gross, right? It looks nasty. Well, it has changed color over time. It's one of my oldest plates. It has yellowed itself, which has nothing to do with anything that I've ever put on it. Uh, I don't care if my plate is stained. I don't. I mean, you can clean it up with hand sanitizer and with baby oil to condition it and clean stuff off. And sometimes you have to do that because whatever is there, it keeps coming up in your print. But overall, a gel plate is a tool. It's just a tool, people. It's a tool to apply paint. And so if you don't care if your hammer is rusty, and if you don't care if your shovel has dirt on it, then you should not care if your gel plate is stained. It's irrelevant. It's just doesn't even matter. So with the big one, my last layer I picked up is with gray paint, and that's the reason it looks so grayed out, is literally gray paint. I think it looks cool. I think it kind of looks like a drop cloth or something from the 80s where that was so popular to splash bright colors onto things. I don't know why that was popular, but it was there for a while in the 80s. But the second one I picked up with light blue paint, and then I cannot remember what color I put on the top. It must have been white. I think it was white. And that was onto black cardstock. So you see, you get a different look depending on what your pickup layer color is, what your paper underneath color is. On that one, I just used it to clean out a stencil because now I'm going to do it with some stencils. That's a Stencil Girl stencil. In fact, all these are Stencil Girl stencils. So then I'm just going to apply some paint in different layers through the stencils, because you can certainly do that to get pattern. It's fun. I think that this print that I'm building up right now on the 6x6 turned out to be my favorite of these multiple layer prints that I made. Put a little bit of alcohol ink on that one and some gold alcohol ink, gold metallic. And then I used a stencil and picked up some of the the paint off of it through the stencil. And then I ended up using red paint as my final layer to pick everything up with, my thin pickup layer. And it turned out really cool. At least I think so. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that print. I don't know what I'm going to do with any of these. Probably use them for collage most likely, but I like the way that 6x6 turned out in the end. So that is making multiple layers on your gel plate. Prompt 11, I think. Isn't that cool? I think that's really cool. I like it. Interesting patterns and shapes and stuff in it. I liked that one the best. But you just never know. Prompt 12 was repeat patterns. The easiest way to make a repeat pattern, of course, would be to use a stencil because a lot of stencils have repeat patterns on them. Like this, my favorite stencil from Stencil Girl, which is, I think, called Brick and Mortar or Mortar something. And then this other thing that I'm using to make a repeat pattern on the right-hand side is a stamp. It's from Stampin' Up. It's a Harlequin stamp. I also have a stencil that looks similar to that, but I couldn't find it, so I just used the stamp. So I used the stamp to remove paint off of the plate. So I put the layer of plate on, put the stamp layer of paint on, put the stamp on, lifted it up, and removed the paint to get the pattern. Because rubber stamps are similar to acrylic paint, and the paint sticks to it, which is why you need to clean your rubber stamps right away when you're using them with acrylic paint. So then I put some bright colors on. I removed the stencil, and on the other one, I just put paint right over the top of it and used some black paper because it'll give a different look. There was so much paint on these. The stencil had a bunch of paint, so you can see I made a print with the stencil on my scratch paper. But isn't that pretty? That's one of my favorite things to do is to leave the black underneath and then put bright colors in between. And I have a whole video of just about that. So then for my second ghost print, because I had so much paint on there, I was able to take a second print using a layer of white paint to lift it. So I got two different looks, which are both cool. Both cool. Because there was just a lot of paint. More paint than I normally put, but I guess I was feeling heavy-handed when I squeezed. I don't know. So other repeat patterns, decided to make some without stencils. I've got bubble wrap, which has a repeat pattern of circles on there. And I've got this packaging, which is like it's a bubble pack. It had buttons or something in it, and then it had a card on the back, and so they could rattle around in there. I've got a handmade stamp, and I just stamped some little swirlies down in a line. I love the effect that packaging has. I like those rectangles, stacked up rectangles. I also used a card to just kind of scratch along and make a little line. Here's a spool. These are just things I was using the other day, and they were still out. So I have so many DIY mark making tools under my desk. I need to organize them better. And again, I put way too much paint. I was having a heavy-handed day. Way too much white paint on there, way too much. You needed a thin, thin layer to lift. But in this case, I got two prints out of each one, so it was fine. So there's the repeat pattern of the spools, and then I've got the other one coming up. I hope you're enjoying this video. If you are, please remember to give it a thumbs up. You can leave me a comment or question below, and I'll answer you around 24 hours. You can share this on Pinterest. You can share it on Facebook. Subscribe, turn on notification bells. I don't know if I said that. And of course, if this is your last video for the day, please click over to a different video that has 1 million views instead of leaving YouTube on my video because I get punished for that. They think I sent you away. They think I said, hey, stop watching YouTube and go away. I never said that. You should just keep watching, but just watch one that has 1 million views. So I picked those two up, and I'm going to do a little bit more repeat patterns with some stamps just to finish up these ideas of repeat patterns. You can repeat patterns with any type of mark making tool, a card, a stamp, packaging, anything. The whole idea is just to repeat the pattern. I don't, there's that's not really a technique. Okay, it's just an idea. People find repeat patterns, humans find repeat patterns very pleasing. We really do. We like it. We like symmetry and, repetition and things that line up with each other. It makes a human brain happy. That's just, I think, hardwired in our DNA. In fact, it's hard to fight it. If you're trying to make a random pattern, it's very difficult. If you ever really try to be random, not an easy thing to do. So I picked up the one on the left with brown, which kind of turned out cool, and I picked up the one on the right with a Naples yellow, so you can see that light pink rectangles on there. So that is it for me. Here's a few close-ups, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.